Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk. And we're going to combine Coffee Talk with Story Time with Uncle Sage. And today, in both segments, we're talking about the Men in Black. Don't. So first, the Coffee Talk on the Men in Black. So, if you've seen the Will Smith movie, you understand that there's this theory, this idea, this mythology, that there is this group of special agents that dress all in black with black fedoras and black sunglasses, just like the Will Smith movie, and their job is to corral in all of the extraterrestrials that are roaming all over the planet, and also to cover up and to suppress the truth about aliens even existing in the first place. Don't. The history of the Men in Black go all the way back to really the Roswell incident. That shortly after the Roswell incident, it is said that the President of the United States called together a group to come up with the best bet to deal with these aliens on, what do we do next? Okay, so we're not alone in the universe, now what? So they put together a group called the Majestic 12. Now this is going to be back in the late 1940s, early 1950s. I believe this is all under the Eisenhower administration. The Majestic 12 was a group apparently of 12 extremely intelligent, high-ranking officials with government clearance who would get together and decide what to do about the alien problem. Don't. So what they decide to do is to suppress the entire thing. They're going to suppress it. They believe the American people can't handle the truth, and so the Majestic 12 decide to suppress it, and they put together a secret government agency to make sure that the truth is completely suppressed. Don't. So then you start to have these stories of these men that start in the 1950s and 60s that are all dressed in black, just like in the movie, and that if you see a UFO, they will come and convince you that it is swamp gas that you have seen, and that it's in your best interest if it's swamp gas that you saw. You understand? I don't care if you saw the dome. I don't care if the little people came out and shook your hand. What you saw was swamp gas, right? Because you want to live, right? Because you don't want to end up in the FEMA camp, right? Because you don't want to end up, disappearing. So it was the swamp gas. It was a weather balloon, right? Right? Okay. So there's all these stories. Some of the stories go a little further and claim that the Men in Black aren't even human, that their faces seem almost like they're wearing human skin. They're expressionless, emotionless, soulless, black-eyed beings. Don't know about all of that. But I will tell you this, I do believe in the Men in Black, and not the movie. I'm not talking about the movie version, but the real-life version, because I had interaction with them. Yeah, I've had them look me in the eye and say, if you're smart, you're going to do exactly as we tell you to do. If you like to live, if you like freedom, if you like, to have your life, then you should, do what we say. Well, you're like, Sage, when did you encounter is it when you saw the UFOs? Well, the Men in Black are also associated with other things besides UFOs. They are associated with the suppression of technology. So let's say you were to find out about some secret space technology, they would come and visit you. Or let's say you saw something you shouldn't have seen. Or let's say you discovered something or built something they didn't want you to discover or build. The same suppressive Gestapo dressed in black fedora, black sunglasses people will come to you and have a little chat with you. And typically I've heard that they show Department of Energy or Department of Interior or the Department. They all have these different, Department of, now I guess they'd be Homeland Security potentially. But they come and they have a chat with you about your stuff and to make sure that you are a good American, if you know what's good for you. So now I put my coffee down, buy coffee, because we're going to talk about story time with Uncle Sage and my encounters with the men in black. So many of you know that my dad was a Marine and a Pentecostal preacher. But what you don't know is that he was also a welder, an engineer, and a guy who first built cannery machinery, but went on to have a pretty full career building sawmill machinery here in Oregon. And to give you an idea of this machinery, what it entailed, if you were to look at these sawmill machines that my dad built, they look like a building. They just look like a big 2-story building with, big green metal building with a little door at the bottom. And, you would stick logs in one end and 2x4s would come out the other. And, of course, if you went in that little green door, you would see that inside this metal box, the size of a 2 or 3-story building, or 4-story building in some cases, is this giant machine with belts and gears and chains. And, it's in saw blades, obviously. It's like a death machine inside there. And my dad would design these from the blueprints up. Then he would build them inside of an enormous, the size of like an airplane hangar, an enormous, warehouse in Portland. And then when they were done, they would dismantle them, box them all up, and number each part, and then ship them off to wherever the sawmill was being upgraded or built. Many times my dad would travel there and spend time there while he built or helped oversee the rebuilding of the sawmill machine. So the old man was handy. He was a gearhead. You might remember me talking about him making me rebuild a Briggs & Stratton gasoline engine when I was just a small child. When I was 5 years old, I asked him how boats are made, and I really wanted to know, what are they made out of, wood or metal or fiberglass or what? And instead, he just started drawing a boat, and then he made me build a boat. And we built the boat that I grew up fishing in. We built when I was a little kid in the backyard out of scrap plywood and fiberglass. And so the old man was definitely handy, and he used to talk about how there was this man that he knew in the old days who had built a gasoline motor that would run on water. Don't. And I never really believed the old man. He had so many stories, and I was like, okay, so maybe some guy, I don't know, well, maybe he was being fooled. But my dad said that he always believed that he could rebuild that contraption because the guy that built it showed him the blueprints, told him how it worked, and then he got to examine the working prototype up close. So when my dad retired from the ministry and he got older and he got bored, he was never much for having friends. He was too busy, but he made friends with somebody across the back fence out in Grapevine, Texas. And this guy had been some kind of engineer, and he'd worked in the defense contracting business, and he'd always been curious about engines that run on water. And when he heard my old man tell him the story, he's like, let's build it. Yeah, let's build it. Let's just make one. And Dad was like, well, I never had the time, but yeah, why not? Let's just build one. So my dad and this defense contractor, retired engineer, decide to build an engine that runs on water. Now, I was a young man. I was 18 years old. I had 2 jobs and a girlfriend, so I was a busy guy. And my clutch had gone out on my Pinto. And so I had to replace the clutch pressure plate, the clutch and pressure plate on my Pinto, which meant dropping the transmission. So that's what I was focused on, was my life. But my dad and this guy built this engine, and they had it on a wooden frame. It was a Briggs & Stratton gasoline engine like you'd have for a generator or a lawnmower. And they had it on a wooden stand, mounted on a wooden stand, so you could really see how everything worked. And then him and this guy built this machine, and I kid you not, I promise you, I saw them fill it up with water and run it on water. Now, they had to use a little bit of gas to get it started, like they primed something with gasoline. But once that kicked over, the whole rest of the process ran on water. And I watched it run one day for 6 hours on just pure water. And they couldn't have started with less than a pint of gasoline. It would have been, 6 ounces or 4 ounces, a few shot glasses of gasoline. And then the rest was water, and it ran for 6 hours. And, when they would fire it up and run it and sit there and kick it and go, why aren't all the cars running on this? And, they would, I will tell you this, the only byproduct was a little bit of steam and some water that dripped out of the muffler. And that's all there was to it. There was no smoke. You could run it inside the garage with the garage door down and not gas yourself because it only put out water, not carbon monoxide. And so it only put out steam. And I wish I had paid closer attention, and I wish I was more of a gear guy instead of an artistic guy, and I wish I'd paid attention. And like I said, I had my own life, 2 jobs and a girlfriend, and a car was breaking down. I had to go to work the next day, and I feverishly put my Pinto in the garage right next to the run-on water gas machine over there, the engine. And it was on one side of the bay, and I was on the other. And it was a summer night, and we had both doors up. And I was covered in grease. I had dropped the transmission, pulled the pressure plate and the clutch, and I had replaced the clutch and pressure plate. And now I was feverishly trying to stab the transmission, and the sun had gone down, and it was starting to get late, and I had to be at work at 6 in the morning. It means I had to have this thing up running and test drove before I went to bed. And so I was really focused on this, and the old man was standing out there making sure I did it right, not getting his hands dirty. When suddenly I feel this sense of disturbance in the force. I can feel the old man tense up, even though I can only see his ankles. And I roll out on the little roller thing out from underneath the car, and I see that he's standing almost in a combat stance as 2 men approach out of the darkness, completely dressed in black suits, except for their shirt was white. So black suit, black tie, black shoes. And yes, they wore the black fedoras. And this would have been in the mid-'80s. And so the fedoras like that were way out of style. They almost looked like some kind of, I don't know, Amish mafia hitmen. But, hey, we got disturbed. I rolled out, stood up to meet these 2 guys that walk up. And what's funny is how they walked up to us like they weren't intruding, like they owned the place. They walked up on us like they owned our house and could go anywhere they wanted. And they came right up in the garage and only kind of halfway looked at Dad as he said, excuse me, can I help you? And these guys almost ignore him and zero in right on the machine, like they can see the machine. And people had been coming around and watching us run this machine. Sometimes groups of 15 to 20 people would stand in awe as we would run this machine in the garage on water. So the whole neighborhood was kind of abuzz about how these 2 old men made this machine that ran on water. And so I guess that's how it got back to them. Maybe it was because this guy had the military background or whatever, the defense contractor background, and he spoke to the wrong person about his project. All I know is they came to our house. They saw the machine, they zeroed in on it, they walked right over on it. And they turned around and they said my dad's name. And which I won't use. And really, they were just very much down to business. There was no small talk. There was no, how are you doing tonight? There was no, oh, we were just curious and we wanted to come by and talk to you. No, it was like, did you make this machine? And he said, yeah, me and the guy next door. And then they said his name. Yes, we know about him, and you built it. You're the guy that built it? Yeah. Where are the blueprints? Do you have the plans? Are there any notes on this machine? And there was a workbench over there, and he had them rolled up on the workbench, because he'd take the plans out and talk to people and show them how it worked. And so they said, are there any other blueprints? Do you have anything else in the house? And they said no. He said, no, this is all out here in the garage in the workshop. And really, I didn't know what to think of these guys. I was sizing them up and down. I was mainly disturbed because my dad was so alarmed. Like, I was around him in the woods growing up and, in dangerous situations, and I could sense the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. And So once they confirmed that those were the only blueprints and the only plans on it, they just walked over and started scooping it all up. They were turning over papers and moving tools on the workbench, and they were just gathering up anything that had had any handwritten notes on it. One guy was gathering it all up, and I think the other guy went over and started looking at the engine and how it was mounted and whether it was screwed to the sawhorses or whether you could pick it up and carry it. And they had built it on a frame, so the two guys that built it, they could carry it. One guy on each end, kind of like, I don't know how you would how the Queen of Egypt was carried around in her cart, like a stretcher with two poles, and it was mounted on the two 2x4s, and you had handles on each end. And so there's one guy checking it out while the other guy ran out to their black van. They had a all black cargo van, and it was parked right. That's another reason why we really didn't notice them, because the way they came in, they parked just right out the edge where we couldn't see them. And they must have turned their lights on, because really the first knowledge I had of them was these guys walking up on them. And for me, it was feet. I just saw black shoes and slacks, And when I rolled out to see who was walking up on us, and so the one guy takes the blueprints out, stashes them in the van, and comes back just about the time the guy figures out all they got to do is pick it up and walk away with it. And they just turned to him and they said, "We're going to be taking this." And my dad said, "You can't do that." And they said, "Sir, we're the federal government. We can do whatever we want. We can take this. We could also take you. We could take you. We could take your kid. We can take your stuff. We can take your house. We can take whatever we want." And that shut the old man up. He just kind of, crossed his arms and went, "Okay, so I guess I'm being shook down here." And they grabbed it on each end, and they just walked it out to the van where the other guy had already opened the back doors. And they just put it right in the back of the van and locked it up. And then they walked back over, the two of them, and they said, "Okay, here's the deal. If you like your life, if you like your freedom, if you love your country, then you will adhere to what we were about to tell you. You will never, ever, under any circumstances, ever build this machine again. You will never draw this machine again. You will never make blueprints of this machine again. You will never tell another person how this machine works, how it was built. This is suppressed technology. This technology, if this technology were to come out, it would destroy our economy," is what they told us. This would destroy our economy. Our economy is based on a petrol dollar economy, and if you were to disrupt that, it would send the whole globe into into an international depression. And this technology will someday come out, but it is not time for this technology to come out. And we say so. And if you build this, if you draw this, if you make another one of these, if you talk about this, bad things could happen to you and your family. Honestly, you could disappear. You could just disappear and never be heard from again. Are we making ourselves clear that if you like life and liberty and you want to live and you love your country, you will never build this again? You will never talk about it again. You will never draw it again. And you will never share how you built this with anyone. Do I make myself clear? And my dad was like, clear as day. And they got in their van and they drove away. And we talked about it. And it was at that point that my dad told me that his friend that had built the machine before, the one that he had seen running, that this man had in fact disappeared. That this man was no longer part of my dad's life, and he didn't know this guy or where he was, because the guy just never showed up again. And he lived down the street. He just never came out. We never knew what happened to him, that my dad said. And he said, and I moved away before I could figure out what the mystery was. If you know how I was raised, we moved a lot. We weren't there in Grapevine for very long until we were moving on again. So this is my true story of how I met the men in black. And I believe these individuals are the same kind of people, the same people that visit you if you've had a close encounter or you've seen a UFO or you have some UFO evidence. And I think these are the secret police, the Gestapo, the KGB of the United States government. And I think that they work for a secret group. And it doesn't matter whether they say they work for NASA or the Department of Energy or the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of the Interior. They're really just the men in black. Don't. God save our republic.